aliens cried out for help, and Earth's Marines stormed from the ashes. Part 1. The Signal from the Void. The night sky over Seoul was quiet. Stars blinked like distant fires, and the moon hung low over the rebuilt towers of the city. 300 years had passed since the Great Collapse, the war that had nearly killed humanity forever. The bombs had fallen. The cities had burned. Billions had died in fire and radiation and hunger. But humans were stubborn creatures. They had crawled out of their bunkers and shelters. They had buried their dead and planted new seeds in poisoned soil. They had rebuilt, slowly, painfully, one brick at a time. Now Earth was healing. The air was clean again. The oceans were blue. Children played in parks where their great-grandparents had once hidden from death. Humanity had survived, but it had learned a hard lesson. War was not glory. War was ash and bone and weeping mothers. Lieutenant Park sat alone in the Seoul Orbital Relay Station, watching her screens with tired eyes. She was 26 years old, with short black hair and a face that rarely smiled. Her job was simple. She listened to the stars. She monitored signals from deep space, searching for anything unusual. Most nights, she heard nothing but static and the distant hum of dying stars. Tonight was different. The signal came at 3:47 in the morning. Almost missed it. She had been drinking cold coffee and thinking about her bed. Then her screen lit up with a pattern she had never seen before. It was not random noise. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was a message. She sat up straight, her heart beating faster. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, running the signal through translation software. The computer worked for several minutes. Then words appeared on her screen. Words that made her blood run cold. "Anyone, please, they are killing us all. Anyone who hears this, please help us. We are dying, they are killing everyone, please, please." The message repeated, over and over. Thousands of voices crying out together, their words overlapping into a chorus of despair. Listened with her hand pressed against her mouth. She had heard sad things before. She had heard recordings from the Great Collapse, the final radio broadcasts of cities dying. But this was different. This was happening now. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between stars, an entire civilization was screaming for help. She made the call. Admiral arrived at the relay station 2 hours later. He was an old man, 73 years old, with white hair and deep lines on his face. He had been a soldier once, during the last years of the collapse. He had seen things that still visited him in nightmares. Now he commanded Earth's small defense fleet, 12 ships that existed only to protect their wounded planet from threats that might never come. He listened to the signal in silence. When it finished, he closed his eyes for a long moment. He said quietly. Nodded. The Confederacy had made contact with Earth 50 years ago. They were a peaceful coalition of 6 alien species who traveled the stars in beautiful ships, trading art and knowledge and medicine. They had looked at humanity and seen a broken species, too violent and too primitive to join the galactic community. They had offered kind words and distant sympathy, then left Earth alone. Now they were dying. Admiral called an emergency council. Leaders from every nation gathered in the Great Hall of the United Earth Parliament. They listened to the signal. They read the intelligence reports. The Dominion, a military empire that had conquered half the galaxy, had turned its hungry eyes toward They had no weapons. They had no soldiers. They had believed that kindness and diplomacy could solve any problem. They were wrong. The council debated for hours. Some argued that Earth should stay silent. Earth was small. Earth was weak. Earth had barely enough ships to defend its own planet. What could they possibly do against an empire that had crushed hundreds of worlds? Others argued that the risk was too great. If Earth sent its Marines and failed, there would be no one left to protect humanity. They might turn their attention to Earth next. The arguments went back and forth. Voices rose in anger and fear. The fate of 2 civilizations hung in the balance. Then Sergeant Major Han stood up. She was 41 years old, with a face full of scars and eyes that had seen too much death. She had survived the collapse as a child, hiding in a bunker while her parents died above ground. She had grown up in the ruins, learned to fight before she learned to read, and dedicated her life to protecting others from the horrors she had witnessed. She walked to the front of the hall. The room fell silent. "I have listened to your debates," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "I have heard your fears. They are reasonable fears. We are small. We are weak. We might die if we go." She paused, looking around the room. "But I also heard that signal. I heard thousands of voices crying out in the dark, hoping someone would answer. They called to the void and we heard them. Now we must decide what kind of species we want to be." She placed her hands on the podium. 300 years ago we burned. We called out for help and no one came. We were alone in our suffering. We crawled out of the ashes by ourselves with no one to hold our hands. Her eyes were hard as stone. "We can let the burn alone the way we burned. We can protect ourselves and watch another civilization die, or we can be the ones who answer. We can be the help that no one sent for us." She straightened her back. "I know what I choose. I choose to go. I choose to fight. Because if we do nothing, we are no better than the ash we crawled out of." The vote was held 1 hour later. It passed by a single vote. Aliens cried out for help, and Earth's Marines stormed from the ashes. Part 2: The Forging of Fire. The training camps were built in the deserts of Old Mongolia, where the wind never stopped blowing and the sun burned like an angry god. 4,200 Marines gathered there, the best soldiers Earth had to offer. They came from every nation, every background, every corner of the healing planet. They spoke different languages and prayed to different gods, but they all wore the same uniform and carried the same purpose in their hearts. Colonel Shin stood on a platform above them, watching his soldiers train. He was 52 years old, tall and lean, with gray at his temples and a calm face that hid a fierce mind. He had survived the collapse as a young man, fighting in the last terrible battles before the world went quiet. He had built the Marine Corps from nothing, training warriors in the ruins of the old world. Now he would lead them to the stars. The numbers were impossible. Earth had 12 transport ships. The Dominion had conquered over 200 worlds. Their fleets numbered in the thousands. Their soldiers numbered in the millions. By every measure of logic and mathematics, this mission was suicide. But had seen impossible things before. He had seen humans survive radiation that should have killed them. He had seen starving refugees build cities from rubble. He had seen children born in bunkers grow up to become doctors and teachers and leaders. Humans did not understand the word impossible. They heard it and smiled, then proved it wrong. The training was brutal. The Marines studied everything known about the enemy. They learned that there were tall creatures, nearly 3 meters high, with thick gray skin and 4 arms. They were strong and fast and utterly without mercy. They had conquered half the galaxy through simple brutality, overwhelming their enemies with numbers and firepower. But they had a weakness. They had never faced an enemy that refused to break. Every species that had conquered had eventually surrendered. When the battle turned against them, they gave up. They accepted defeat. They bowed their heads and became slaves. They did not understand any other way. In their minds, fighting to the death was foolish. Continuing to resist after defeat was certain was madness. They had never met humans. Corporal worked in the demolitions unit, learning to destroy things with beautiful precision. She was 24 years old, small and quiet, with clever hands and a mind that saw patterns others missed. She had grown up in the rebuilt city of, the daughter of engineers who had helped design Earth's first starships. She had joined the Marines because she wanted to protect the world her parents had helped rebuild. Her partner was Private, a medic who never stopped smiling. He was 22, the youngest in their squad, with a round face and gentle eyes. He had lost his entire family to radiation sickness when he was 15. He had watched them die, one by one, unable to save them. He had become a medic because he never wanted to feel that helpless again. Together they trained in conditions that would kill an ordinary human. They practiced fighting in low gravity, where a single jump could send you flying into the sky. They trained in toxic atmospheres, wearing suits that would keep them alive for only a few hours. They fought in temperatures so cold that exposed skin would freeze in seconds. They learned to be afraid, then they learned to fight anyway. Doctor worked in a different kind of battlefield. She was Earth's leading expert on alien technology, a brilliant woman of 60 who had spent her life studying the few pieces of technology that had come to Earth. Now she had a new mission. She had to give the Marines a chance to survive. She worked for 3 weeks without sleep, studying captured weapons and armor. She learned how their plasma guns worked, how their shields generated force fields, how their ships traveled between stars. Then she began to build. The shield generator she created was small enough to fit in a backpack. It could stop 3 plasma blasts before it failed. It was imperfect and experimental and had never been tested in real combat. But it was something. It was hope in a small metal box. On the night before departure, Admiral addressed the assembled Marines. The 12 ships stood behind him, their engines glowing softly in the darkness. The stars above seemed closer than ever before. "I will not lie to you," the Admiral said. His voice was old and tired but steady. "Many of you will not come home. The enemy is stronger than us. They have more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. By every logical measure, we should stay home and hide." He paused, looking at the faces of his soldiers. "But logic is not why we are here. We are here because somewhere out there, millions of innocent beings are dying. They called out for help and we heard them. They are not our family. They are not our nation. They are not even our species. But they are people. They feel pain and fear and hope just as we do." He raised his hand toward the stars. "The galaxy watched us burn 300 years ago. They saw us as savages, animals killing each other over land and power. They were not wrong. We were savages. We nearly destroyed ourselves." His voice grew stronger. "But we changed. We crawled out of the fire and chose to be better. We chose to build instead of destroy. We chose to heal instead of wound. And now we face the greatest test of that choice." He looked at his Marines with fierce pride. "We go not for revenge. We go not for glory. We go because this is who we choose to be. We are humanity. We do not abandon those who call for aid. We answer. We always answer." The Marines cheered. The sound rose into the night sky, a roar of defiance against the darkness. 1 hour later, the 12 ships launched into the void. Earth watched them go and prayed. Aliens cried out for help, and Earth's Marines stormed from the ashes. Part 3: First Blood on Prime. The planet was burning. Prime had once been beautiful. The Marines had seen pictures during their training. Great cities of white stone and blue glass. Gardens that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Rivers that glowed with gentle light at night. A world where 6 species had lived together in peace for 10,000 years. Now it was hell. Warships filled the sky like a swarm of angry insects. They rained fire on the cities below, turning white stone to black ash. On the ground, soldiers marched through the ruins, hunting survivors. They killed those who ran. They captured those who surrendered. The screaming had not stopped for weeks. Colonel Shin stood on the bridge of his transport ship, watching the destruction through the main screen. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady. He had seen horror before during the collapse, but this was different. This was happening to people who had done nothing wrong, people who had believed in peace and kindness and the goodness of the universe. They had been wrong, but they did not deserve this. "Begin the drop," he ordered. The Marines deployed in atmospheric insertion pods. These were small metal capsules, just big enough for one soldier, designed to fall through the sky like meteors. They had never seen anything like them. Their sensors detected the pods and registered them as debris, pieces of destroyed satellites falling from orbit. They did not realize their mistake until it was too late. Sergeant Major Han was the first to land. Her pod crashed through the roof of a destroyed building, slamming into the ground with enough force to crack stone. She kicked open the door and rolled out, her rifle already in her hands. She was in the heart of the capital, directly behind lines. Around her, more pods were falling. Her squad of 12 Marines landed within seconds of each other, emerging from their pods like angry ghosts. The soldiers nearby turned to look, confused. They had never seen humans before. They did not know what they were looking at. Showed them. Her first shot took a soldier in the throat. Her second shot killed the one beside him. Then the rest of her squad opened fire, and the street became a storm of death. They were strong and fast, but they were caught completely by surprise. They fell by the dozens before they could even raise their weapons. The battle lasted 14 hours. The Marines fought like nothing they had ever seen. They used cover, hiding behind walls and inside buildings, popping out to fire and then disappearing again. They coordinated their attacks, hitting the enemy from multiple directions at once. When they were wounded, they kept fighting. When their weapons ran dry, they picked up weapons and kept fighting. When they ran out of ammunition entirely, they fought with knives and fists and teeth. The commander watched the battle from his orbiting warship, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. He had conquered 37 worlds. He had killed millions of enemies. He had never seen anything like this. The humans took wounds that should have been fatal, plasma burns that would make any other species collapse in agony, broken bones that would leave any other soldier helpless. But they kept fighting. They crawled across battlefields with shattered legs. They fired weapons with arms that were barely attached to their bodies. They refused to die. And when they did die, their companions fought even harder. Private became a legend that day. He was a medic, trained to save lives, not to take them. But when his squad was pinned down by fire, he did not hesitate. He ran into the open, ignoring the plasma bolts that burned the air around him, and dragged 3 wounded Marines to safety. Then he went back for more. When a soldier cornered him in a ruined building, had no weapon. He had only his medical tools. He killed the alien with a surgical knife, then returned to treating his patients. Civilians who had been hiding in the building watched in silent amazement. Corporal destroyed an entire armored column by herself. She planted explosives in the foundation of a damaged building, waited until the enemy vehicles passed beneath it, and brought the whole structure down on top of them. Then she spent the next 3 hours digging survivors out of the rubble. She saved soldiers along with everyone else. When asked why, she simply shrugged. "They are wounded," she said. "Wounded people need help." By nightfall, the Marines held 3 districts of the capital. They had lost more soldiers in one day than in their previous 50 conquests combined. Their commanders were screaming at each other, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The survivors emerged from their hiding places and looked at the humans with wonder. These strange creatures, these supposed primitives from a backwater planet, had done the impossible. They had fought and won. An old, his blue skin covered in ash and blood, approached Han as she sat on a pile of rubble, reloading her weapon. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you come? We ignored your people. We thought you were beneath us. We offered you nothing." Looked up at him. Her face was covered in dirt and burns. Her left eye was swollen shut. She had not slept in 30 hours. She smiled. "You called for help," she said simply. "We heard you." The old wept. The battle for Prime had only begun. Aliens cried out for help, and Earth's Marines stormed from the ashes. Part 4: The Price of Defiance. Victory was not free. It never was. The Dominion did not accept defeat. They had conquered half the galaxy by crushing anyone who dared to resist. A single lost battle meant nothing to them. They simply sent more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. They would drown the humans in blood if necessary. 3 additional battle fleets arrived at Prime within a week. Over 100 warships filled the sky, blocking out the stars. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship and counted the enemy vessels. His 12 ships against their 100. The mathematics were clear. There was no way to win in space. So he made a different choice. All ships, he announced over the communication system, prepare for emergency landing. We are going to the surface. His officers stared at him in shock. Landing meant abandoning any chance of retreat. Landing meant trapping themselves on a planet surrounded by enemies. Landing meant fighting until they won or died, with no middle ground. Smiled a tired old man's smile. We did not come here to leave, he said. We came here to stand. The 12 Earthships crashed down onto Prime, their hulls screaming as they tore through the atmosphere. They landed in the districts the Marines had captured, their massive bodies becoming instant fortresses. The crews poured out, joining their fellow soldiers on the ground. Now there was no escape. Now there was only the fight. Colonel Shin took command of the ground defense. He divided the Marines into units and spread them across the city, turning every street into a trap, every building into a stronghold. They did not have enough soldiers to hold everywhere, so they held nowhere completely. Instead, they struck and retreated, making the pay in blood for every meter they advanced. They learned to help. They were not warriors. They had never held weapons, never trained for combat, but they could carry supplies. They could treat wounds. They could guide the Marines through hidden tunnels and forgotten passages. They could be eyes and ears in places the soldiers could not go. An entire civilization that had rejected violence for 10,000 years began to understand why sometimes violence was necessary. Not for conquest, not for glory, but for survival, for protecting the people you loved. Sergeant Major Han fought on the front lines for 17 days straight. She slept in 2-hour intervals, ate whatever she could find, and killed more soldiers than anyone could count. On the 18th day, a plasma bolt took her right arm off at the elbow. Any other soldier would have been evacuated. Any other soldier would have accepted that their fighting days were over. Was not any other soldier. Doctor built her a new arm from salvage technology. It was ugly and heavy and hummed with strange energy. It took 4 hours to learn how to use it. Then she returned to the front lines, her metal fingers wrapped around her rifle, her eyes burning with cold fire. I still have one good arm, she told her squad. That is enough. Colonel Shin led the most dangerous mission himself. Intelligence had located the main command center, a heavily fortified building in the heart of enemy territory. Destroying it would throw the forces into chaos, buying precious time for the defenders. He took 20 volunteers. They knew the odds. They went anyway. The battle lasted 6 hours, 20 Marines against over 1,000 soldiers. They fought through corridors and stairwells and armored gates. They used every weapon they had, then used their fists when the weapons failed. They left a trail of bodies behind them, a path of destruction that would become legend. 11 Marines died. Colonel Shin was wounded 7 times, but they reached the command center. They planted their explosives. They killed the general with a knife through his throat. The explosion was visible from orbit. Doctor had been working on a different weapon, not a bomb or a gun, but something far more powerful. She had been recording everything, every battle, every act of courage, every moment of sacrifice. Now she broadcast it to the galaxy. The message spread across 1,000 worlds. Species who had surrendered to the without fighting watched humans die to protect strangers. Species who had accepted slavery as inevitable watched humans refuse to break. Species who had given up hope watched humans stand against impossible odds and smile. The Dominion sent a message to Earth, demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. They promised to spare humanity if they from Prime. They promised destruction if they refused. Colonel Shin recorded his response. His face was bloody and burned. His voice was hoarse from days of shouting orders, but his eyes were clear. "You do not understand us," he said. "You think you can threaten us with death, but we are already dead. We have been dead since we climbed out of the ashes of our world. Every day since then has been borrowed time." He leaned toward the camera. "You cannot frighten the dead. You can only join us." The message ended. They prepared their final assault. They would burn Prime to nothing, destroying humans and alike. They had done it before to worlds that resisted too long. They would do it again. The Marines watched the enemy fleet gather above them. They knew what was coming. They checked their weapons. They said goodbye to their friends. They prepared to die standing. Aliens cried out for help, and Earth's Marines stormed from the ashes. Part 5, From the Ashes, Fire. The sky was full of death. Warships moved into position above Prime, their weapons charging with terrible energy. They had done this before to dozens of worlds that refused to submit. They would burn the atmosphere itself, turning the air into poison. They would melt the cities into glass. They would leave nothing alive, not even bacteria in the soil. Admiral stood in the ruins of his crashed flagship, watching the enemy fleet through a broken window. He was tired. He had not slept in days. His body ached with wounds he had ignored for too long. He knew he would not survive the coming bombardment. None of them would. But he did not regret coming, not for a single moment. He thought of Earth. He thought of the children playing in rebuilt parks, the farmers growing food in healed soil, the scientists reaching toward the stars. He had given them a chance to be proud. He had shown the galaxy what humanity could be. That was enough. Then the horizon filled with light. At first thought the bombardment had begun. He closed his eyes, waiting for the fire to take him, but the fire did not come. Instead, he heard cheering. He opened his eyes and looked up. The sky was full of ships, hundreds of ships, thousands of ships. They came from every direction, emerging from faster-than-light travel in flashes of brilliant light. They were not ships. They were not human ships. They were ships from across the galaxy, bearing the symbols of 100 different species. They were the ones who had watched Doctor's broadcast. They were the ones who had surrendered to the without fighting. They were the ones who had accepted domination as the natural order of things. They had watched humans die for strangers. They had watched humans fight against impossible odds. They had watched humans refuse to break, refuse to surrender, refuse to give up even when death was certain. And they had felt something they had not felt in generations. Shame. They had given up. They had submitted. They had told themselves that resistance was pointless, that they were too strong, that survival was more important than freedom. They had watched other species die and done nothing. But the humans had done something. The humans had answered a call for help from strangers who had once looked down on them. The humans had sacrificed everything for people they did not know. The humans had shown them what courage looked like. The combined fleet attacked, though, with a fury that shook the stars. Species that had not fought in centuries remembered how. Species that had been slaves found their rage. Species that had forgotten hope discovered it burning in their hearts, kindled by the fire of human defiance. They were strong, they were brutal, they had conquered half the galaxy. But they had never faced a galaxy that was no longer afraid. The battle lasted 3 days. Ships burned by the hundreds. Soldiers fell by the millions. The Dominion that had seemed invincible suddenly looked very small, very fragile, very mortal. On the surface of Prime, the Marines watched the liberation unfold above them. They saw ships explode into brilliant flowers of fire. They saw enemy soldiers retreating, running, surrendering. They saw hope descending from the sky like rain after a long drought. Admiral did not live to see the victory. A final bombardment struck his position in the last hours of the battle. He died at his post, his eyes fixed on the stars, a smile on his old and tired face. They buried him on Prime, in a garden that they had already begun to rebuild. His grave was marked with a simple stone, engraved with words in both human and languages. He answered the call. Sergeant Major Hand stood in the ruins of the capital as the last soldiers were taken prisoner. Her metal arm hummed softly at her side. Her body was covered in scars that would never fully heal. She had lost friends, brothers and sisters in arms, people she had loved like family. But they had one. A young child approached her, moving slowly, nervously. The child was small, with pale blue skin and wide eyes that had seen too much horror. The child looked up with a question on its face. "Why?" the child asked. "Why did you come? You did not know us. We did not help you. We thought we were better than you. Why did you come?" Knelt down, bringing her face level with the child's. She was quiet for a moment, thinking of how to explain something so simple and so complicated. "Because someone had to," she said finally. "When we were burning long ago, we wished someone would come for us. No one did. We were alone in the dark, crying for help that never came." She put her human hand on the child's shoulder. "We decided to be the ones who come. We decided that no one should have to burn alone, not ever again." The child began to cry, held it gently, this small alien creature that was so different from her and so much the same. The Dominion collapsed within 10 years. Rebellion and resistance spread across their empire, inspired by the Battle of Prime. Species that had submitted for generations rose up and fought back. The Dominion that had seemed eternal crumbled into dust. Earth became the founding member of a new galactic coalition. It was not built on power or fear or domination. It was built on a simple promise, written into its founding document by the survivors of the Marine Expeditionary Force. When someone calls for help, we answer. The Marines who died on Prime were honored across 1,000 worlds. Their names were carved into monuments on planets they had never seen. Their stories were taught to children of species they had never met. They became legends, symbols of something that transcended species and worlds and stars. And in every corner of the galaxy, parents told their children a new story. Not a story of fear or submission or despair, a story of hope. "When the darkness comes," they said, "look to the stars. The humans will come from the ashes, they always do." The stars burned bright above a healing galaxy. And somewhere on Earth, in a rebuilt city, a child looked up at those stars and dreamed of the day when they too might answer a call for help. The cycle continued. Humanity endured, and the ashes gave birth to fire forever. None of them expected what happened next. Earth's Marines would answer the call.